Hello, thanks for being here today. It is the 5th Wednesday in Lent, and we are continuing our survey of the stations of the cross. Today, we'll be at the 10th station using the numbering of Pope John Paul II's most recent clarification or classification. This is the day that we remember Jesus stripped and crucified. Before we begin with our lesson, just a reminder that the gospel lesson that we're using out of the Gospel of Mark is reproduced below this video for you. Also, 2 brief passages from Psalm 22 and a passage from Mark 10 so that you can follow along or refer back about the things that we are to discuss. As always, I am grateful for those of you who respond to these videos, who ask questions, who challenge me, who wonder if I've gone slightly mad. It gives me an opportunity to think through what it is I said and what it is I mean. It sometimes gives me the opportunity for amendment, and it certainly gives us the opportunity to continue conversations of depth and meaning with one another. So you know how to do that, right? There's a link below, or just email TR Church. Those of you who are members of the church, go ahead and text me your questions, your comments, and I will be putting up a response to this video, God willing, on Friday. So I believe those are the things that we need to cover before we begin. And so we begin in the Word of God, Mark the 15th chapter. Then they brought Jesus to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him and divided his clothes among them, casting lots to decide what each should take. It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And they crucified 2 bandits, one on his right and one on his left. And those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying, "Ah, you who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests, along with the scribes, were also mocking him among themselves and saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross now so that we may see and believe." And those who were crucified with him also taunted him. Here ends our lesson. So, just a few things that strike me as being worthy of our consideration as we contemplate together this mystery that the Lord of life gives himself utterly for us, is stripped, and is crucified. First, let's remember that in this little passage that we shared, there are at least 2 allusions to Psalm 22. And these aren't obscure. For any of us who have spent any time at all in the Psalms, these are virtual quotes. These are things that we should not miss, that we cannot miss, that we're supposed to understand that what's happening here is something that has been known and foreseen and planned for an awfully long time. So the part about Jesus' clothes being divided, the casting of lots, comes from Psalm 22, starting at verse 16. Let me read that to you. "For dogs are all around me, a company of evildoers encircles me. My hands and my feet have shriveled. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among themselves, and for my clothing they cast lots." In like manner, the part about Jesus being mocked and derided also has a source or roots in Psalm 22. Here are verses 7 and 8. "All who see me mock at me. They make mouths at me. They shake their heads. Commit your cause to the Lord. Let him deliver. Let him rescue the one in whom he delights." None of this is a surprise. Not to God. Sometimes Christians, and God forgive them, even Christian pastors, we mix things up and we talk as if Jesus were a footnote to Adam. One of my teachers, Baxter Kruger, is fierce on this point, that Jesus is not a footnote to Adam. Here's what I mean by that. Sometimes in our proclamation, sometimes in our thinking, we say, Adam came, he sinned, God had to scramble and figure out a way to redeem the world, to bring us all back. And that's nonsense. That the Holy Trinity, the Blessed Trinity, knew from all eternity that they intended to create us. And they knew from all eternity that beings like us, gifted with free will, placed in the situation in which we were to be placed, would need redemption. That the redemption of Christ was planned by the Trinity from before the creation of all things. Jesus is not a footnote to Adam. Adam is a footnote to Jesus. Adam is part of the unfolding of the divine plan. From the very beginning and through all the works of the prophets, through all the pages and stories of what we call, as Christians, the Old Testament, there is a plan that is being unfolded, a purpose that is being revealed, a love that is being demonstrated. And here, as Jesus is being crucified, we remember that God knew this in advance, spoke this in advance to some of his people, allowed them to sing his praise about this sacrifice, though they didn't yet understand it, 1,000 years before it actually came to pass. This work of God was something for which God prepared. This moment of sacrifice was something that God undertook intentionally. The redemption of you, my dear friend, is something God did on purpose, always knowing that you were to be brought near. So we have that wondrous grace in this moment of horror. There's something else that I'd point out to you. Here we have a collection of Jesus' titles. The sign above his head says, the King of the Jews. Those who deride him as a false Messiah, as a false King of Israel. He dies with those titles around him and over him. And because he dies with those titles, as he lives, those titles are forever his. He is the ultimate source of grace. He is the great high priest. He is the bridge between humanity and God. He is the rightful king of all things. He is the King of kings. He is the Lord of lords. And one day, thanks be to God, all other governments will pass away and we will be caught up into that kingdom. We will be ruled with benevolence and justice and grace, and there will be peace between all of us. He is the King of the Jews, the Messiah, the King of Israel. There's another piece that we see here in this lesson, that those who were crucified with Jesus also taunt him. Matthew and Mark don't know, or at least choose not to talk about one of the insurrectionists being repentant. That's Luke. It's only Luke. The Gospel of John says that two others were crucified with him, one on his left and one on his right, and we get no other information from John of any kind about how they conducted themselves as they too were dying. Mark wants us to see Jesus completely alone, completely abandoned. Every possible grouping of humanity has fled, or betrayed, or denied, or brutalized, or mocked, or executed Jesus. He is utterly, utterly alone. Not a single friendly face, not a ray of light to give him any peace in his distress. Now, we as a church have talked before about how to understand these divergences of the gospel stories. If that's something that you'd have us go over again, that's a worthwhile use of our time. And you know how to make that happen. Email the church. Let me know that you'd like me to talk again about how it is that Matthew and Mark tell one story, Luke tells a slightly different story, and John tells a third version. I'll be happy to do my best to walk with you down that path. There's also something in this lesson that we've been wondering about for a while. You remember, I trust, that in John 10, there was an exchange between Jesus and his disciples. He told them that he was about to be destroyed, that he was about to be killed. And James and John not only didn't pay any attention to that, they were unbelievably callous in their response. Let me read that to you, but again, it's down below this video if you want to scroll to it and if you want to follow along with me. This is from Mark 10, starting at verse 32. Now they, the disciples and Jesus, were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. They were amazed, and those who followed were afraid. He took the 12 aside again and began to tell them what was to happen to him, saying, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death. Then they will hand him over to the Gentiles. They will mock him and spit upon him and flog him and kill him, and after 3 days he will rise again." James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" They replied, "We are able." Then Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." And so these stories, in close proximity to one another, both of them illuminating the other, both of them filling out the other. There's so much here that we could talk about. We could talk about James and John, the incredible audacity, the incredible blindness, the incredible callousness of heart that Jesus says, "I'm going to Jerusalem where I'll be brutalized and die." And they hear that not at all and ask questions about their position, their standing, their own glory. Of course, it would be beneath a Christian like you to focus on James and John. It would be better for you and for me to ask in which ways we are like James and John in this moment. We too are self-absorbed. We too have difficulty paying attention, especially to difficult things. We're unable to listen with love when we want something, right? And we don't really understand what's happening around us, but we pretend we do, and we talk like we do, and we act like we do. And we are pretty arrogant. We think we've learned enough, grown enough, understood enough, and that how we are is okay. That if God's grading on some sort of curve, we've got it made. But you know, for James and John to be asked, to be enthroned with Jesus when he comes into his glory, to be on his left and his right. And now we understand exactly what that means. That Jesus comes into his glory here. He is lifted up and recognized as King of the Jews, the Messiah, the King of Israel, here. And it's not James and John on his left and right, thanks be to God. It's two insurrectionists for whom those places had been prepared. There's a lot there that we could talk about. Let's today think together about the grace of God who filters our prayers and our wants and our requests through his love for us and his perfect foreknowledge of what will come and what is best for us. We also, though, have an entirely new paradigm today, taking this lesson from Mark 10, putting it next to this lesson from Mark 15, of what it means to come into one's glory. That Jesus tells them in Mark 10 that it's not for him to say who will be on his left and to his right when he comes into his glory. Jesus comes into his glory in this moment. And now for us, that phrase, that idea is forever transformed. For Jesus comes into his glory as he pours himself out on behalf of another. And I know you understand this, but let's just be very, very clear. This is not about a helpless person being abused. And there is no glory, there is no righteousness in a helpless person continuing to be abused. To suffer abuse is outside the will of God. If you're being abused, you're a son of God, a daughter of God, and it is not God's intention that you should be brutalized. Don't make an inappropriate link here, connecting Jesus coming into his glory in the moment he is abused with any abuse you may be experiencing. You're not Jesus. You don't have the power he had. This is a supremely powerful man. This is a supremely powerful being. This is the second person of the Blessed Trinity. This is God the Son in full command of his mind and of his powers, who voluntarily takes the form of a slave, who lays those powers to the side so that he can affiliate utterly with you, so that he can go to the very bottom of our shared human experience. He can experience the worst of our blindness and our brutality, our ignorance and our wickedness, so that whatever happens to you, Jesus has experienced that. Whatever fear, whatever trauma, whatever travail is part of your life, Jesus walks with you in that, has affiliated himself utterly with you. Jesus does something that is unknown in human history. He makes a sacrifice at a level that we have never before seen, which we will never see again. He puts aside the powers and privileges of divinity to take on the death of a criminal abandoned by all. And he did it for you. He went to the bottom for you. He was stripped and brutalized and shamed because he had determined with the Father and the Spirit from before the creation itself that you were to be part of his family, that you were to be redeemed. It was his love for you, his election of you, that held him on this path, that sustained him as he suffered. And so now he is yours and you are his. He is your king, he is your Messiah, he is the way, the truth, and the life for you. For Jesus' sake and by his authority alone, I declare to you the entire forgiveness of all of your sins. You are his. I invite you to pause at this station of the cross, to look with wonder at the grace being poured out for you, the sacrifice being made on your behalf. I invite you to linger there long and to look unflinchingly. And then I invite you to rise up and to dry your tears and to follow Jesus, to obey him and serve him and love him as he works out the reconciliation of all things. My dear friend, it was for you. Be at peace. Let's talk soon. Bye-bye.